So let's open with prayer, and then I'll talk about what we're doing. Father, I thank you for this time right now, for Megan and Stevie and Heather and Wai-Chin and me and anybody else who may wander in that door. We trust that you have appointed this specific time, that you have coordinated and designed who's going to facilitate and receive, and you know exactly what the recipient needs, and you know exactly what the facilitator needs, and each of us who's observing. And so, Lord, we commit this time to your hands. I ask for your peace. I ask for a sense of freedom and life and safety in this room. And Lord, we just invite you to do everything you want to do during this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, Barry, come on in. It's good to see you. Yeah. Well, I was just about to start the introduction, so good timing. So the overview of each week, we'll do 1 or 2 Immanuel Prayer sessions with the debrief afterwards. A lot of times we'll just have time for one, but if we have time for a second one, we'll do that. And we may not always end at noon. It may be at 11:15 or 12:15, just depends on how things go. So if you need to get up and leave, you can do that, but you can stay for as long as you want. So like if you need to leave at 11:30 or 12 and we're still talking, feel free to jet. Today I need to be done a little bit early because we're going to a funeral. So, but that's the basic. Each week we'll do 1 or 2 sessions with someone facilitating, someone receiving, and then a discussion time afterwards. Over the course of the summer, Wai-Chin and Laren and Catherine Penny and I will be leading these sessions. So the first 4 we'll have, we'll invite volunteers and recipients from the audience. And the second set of 4, we're looking, we don't know if this will happen or not, but we're looking for a recipient who would like to receive 4 times in a row. And each of us, Laren, Wai-Chin, Catherine, and I, will facilitate for that person. So you get to see one person's experience over 4 sessions. Because of the way things develop, it can be really interesting to observe that. Plus, it highlights the differences in facilitator style. And so you get to learn some new tools and stuff in a different way that way. Also, the 4 of us that are leading, we're going to rotate who does the introductions and leads the debrief time each week. So you'll see some stylistic differences sort of in the mentoring process of how we lead the debrief sessions. So the basic content will be the same, but again, there's variety in the way we approach it. So Wai-Chin comes from a spiritual direction background and brings that to the table. Laren has done a lot more work with addictions and trauma specifically, and so she brings a different sensitivity. I'm more of a teacher coach type person. And then Catherine is a writer, and she is fantastic at taking things that are intuitive and being able to articulate them. So it's really neat to have her be involved too. Plus her mom has a healing prayer center, so she's grown up around all different types of healing prayer and has a cool background that way. So all 4 of us are not perfect. We're still learning. And although our styles are different, because our styles are different, we learn from each other. But also, it's easy for us to fall into ruts. You know, we're not always getting feedback all the time. We're giving it a lot of the time. And so we are wanting to be open to feedback as well and have you guys share with us what's helpful and not when we facilitate. And even as we lead debrief, we want your feedback and your input. Because even the tools that we know, we don't always use them all. We get used to a certain tool and use that one too much and don't use another one enough. Plus, we just learn from each other, different tools, different ways of wording questions, and so on, as facilitators and as debrief leaders. So one thing that I've been learning actually from Carl Lehman is it's something that he hadn't started incorporating as much explicitly when we learned from him, but he's been sort of adding, so it's in his new book that he's going to come out with soon, is that in the Immanuel session, it can be valuable. Obviously, what we do is inviting Jesus into the memory that comes up, or whatever experience the person is having. But Carl adds another piece, an alternative, or you can do both, of helping the person be aware of Jesus in the present moment. like in this room, in this chair, are you aware of the Lord? And so that's something I'm trying to start weaving into my sessions. But we can always be learning and growing as we learn from each other. So our posture is about learning together and not about getting it right or us having it right and, making sure that you guys do it our way. So,
a question about that.
Yeah.
So is he doing both in the session? So first connecting with a memory and then connecting with Jesus in the present?
Yeah, like then as the person expresses gratitude for that memory, just say, are you aware of the Lord right now as you express gratitude? And then you can use either of those as your connection point. And if one of them fades and it's hard to go back there, you've got another. Plus it brings the past experience more fully into the present moment. So, yeah.
I had a comment on just different styles. Even with the different styles, I think it changes also depending on the recipient.
Yeah.
There might be a certain way that you're going to do things, but the way the recipient responds doesn't mean that you're going to, by rote, repeat those same questions when it didn't really fit, because somebody else that person has already moved a little bit ahead of that piece. Yeah. So
that's a good point. So in this we want to create this learning space, and so we want it to be safe, and especially we want it to be safe for the recipient to be vulnerable and really receive as if they're not people watching, because it can be hard sometimes to receive when you know there are people watching you. So if you're in the recipient role, first of all, thank you for volunteering for that, and secondly, if you become aware of people observing you and that's starting to get in the way, just share that with the facilitator. That can become part of the session, because often that's something, if that is removed, then it becomes easier to connect with the Lord. But also in terms of creating safety for the recipient, it's not just that the recipient is needy. All of us come because we're vulnerable and have needs. And so often, as the recipient receives, all of us receive, even the facilitator. There's some way that the Lord meets each of us. So let's all come in that posture of the same vulnerability that the recipient has. And those, we call them two furs, but for us it would be like a six fur. The Lord probably is going to meet all of us in some way. Just as we're all vulnerable and need the Lord to meet us, also any of us might be triggered by what the recipient experiences or what the facilitator experiences or what comes up in the session. So just notice if you get triggered, make a note of it to come back to it later, or if you need to just get up and take a bathroom break or step out into the hall, that's fine too. Also confidentiality, we want to say anything that happens in this room stays in this room. We want to be tender toward each other's weakness. So there's the weak, strong paradox. Sometimes our weakness is our strength, and that tenderness draws out a strength we didn't even know was there. Also for the facilitator, sometimes it's actually scarier to be in the facilitator role than the recipient role, because you're practicing a new skill and people are watching you, and then you're going to get feedback in front of other people. Like, that can be terrifying. I speak as one that Margaret volunteered to be the first facilitator the first time she did this, and I was like, no, please don't make me. So first of all, just like all of us are vulnerable along with the recipient, all of us can grow as facilitators just like the facilitator can. So if you're coming and you've done facilitator training, pay attention to the facilitator's role and be learning along with the facilitator. If you haven't taken facilitator training, that's okay. Do whatever's helpful for you. If you want to notice facilitator skills, go for it. If not, you can focus on what the recipient is experiencing. We can all be attentive to how we can learn, not just from what the facilitator maybe doesn't know how to do or doesn't do well, but also the things the facilitator does well. So we want to emphasize like what is working well for this facilitator, and have the balance be more weighty on the things that are working and going well, because usually there's more of that than on the things. So we want to focus on just one or two things that the facilitator can work on as growth edges. So as a debrief leaders and also as a group, let's be alert to sort of the group dynamic. And if a couple things have already been shared that are growth edges for that facilitator, maybe if you have another one, hold it back and maybe don't share it this time. That way the person just has one or two things and doesn't get overwhelmed. And usually there really is only one or two things. Most of the time, it's very rare that the negatives actually would outweigh the positives. It's only happened once or twice, and I've been doing this for like 5 years. So, and even if there are things the facilitator can do better, the Lord shows up. I mean, it's really cool to watch. That's one of the cool things about when we mess up as facilitators. We learn to trust God because He still touches and still works. So we want to aim not for a comfort zone for the facilitator where it's always good and it's always nice, but not the panic zone either, where you're like, oh no, I'm a horrible facilitator. We want to go for the learning zone where it's like, oh yeah, I'm pretty good at this. Here's an area I can grow. Does that sound good to you guys? And then for observers, all questions are welcome. We'll have a time when you can make comments or questions. If you have a question, it's not a bad question. It's a real question, and you're welcome to ask it. The only way to find out your answer is to ask. Pay attention to how much you're speaking, your comments and questions, and just notice if maybe you're sharing a lot and there are some other folks that aren't sharing as much. Maybe take a break, pause. If nobody else speaks up, then go ahead and share. So let's just pay attention to that balance. And then you have permission to take care of yourself. If you need to get up and use the bathroom, get something to drink, take a break, take a walk outside, feel free. If you are here because you want to learn facilitator skills, but all of a sudden you realize what the recipient is experiencing is very powerful for you, feel free to close your eyes, lean back in your chair, and just receive along with the recipient. That's awesome. Feel free to do that. And you can pay attention to whatever you're interested in. Whatever's valuable to you, if it's what's happening with the recipient or the facilitator, or paying attention to how the debrief process works, whatever's valuable for you is good. Do you have any questions at this point? Okay. All right. The video is on. We will not post video without permission of both the facilitator and recipient. You guys, we won't necessarily ask permission if you're sitting in the audience, but if you don't want to be on the camera, maybe don't sit in these 4 chairs right here. It might get the back of your head. But if you don't mind kind of having a little bit of the back of your head in the video, no biggie. So, and then my other question is just, when we do the debrief time, we don't have a bunch of people today, so it seems to me like it'd be easier just to leave the camera focused here and let questions come from the audience rather than trying to show you all asking your questions. Is that cool? All right. So then the last thing is just the structure. I will be taking notes today because I'm leading. I'm going to guide the debrief session afterwards. I will take notes for the facilitator. So the facilitator can take those home and have my comments and stuff written out. And we'll ask one of you guys to take notes for the recipient. The recipient will get to take those home. And then observers, you're free to take notes or not, whatever's helpful for you. A trainer, today me, next week Laren, then Weichin, will guide the debrief. And the basic process is we want to focus on a few things. First of all, take a minute to review what happened in the session. If we all kind of have that short summary after the session of, we started here, and then the Lord did this, and then this happened, it's easier to debrief the session and kind of pull out 1 or 2 main themes early on. Then we'll turn to the recipient and ask about the recipient's experience. What stood out to them, what was significant, when did they feel most connected or least connected. And then we'll ask what worked well for the facilitator. What did the facilitator do well? Focus on that first. We always want to lay that foundation first. Start with connection, start with joy. And really that's usually the most substantive feedback, is going, oh wow, I actually did some things well. Like as a facilitator, it can be easy to think about all the things that you think didn't go well. So starting with the things that went well sort of helps reframe that a little bit. And then we'll hear from the facilitator. How did they feel about the session? Were there places where they got stuck or unsure or triggered? Anything, you don't have to share anything you don't want to share. But as a facilitator, what was that like for you? And out of that, the debrief leader and the facilitator and the recipient will guide a process of saying, okay, what are the learning points here? Both as facilitators and also from the session as a whole, are there certain themes or some way the Lord was working that as we start to learn the patterns of how God works, then it's easier to notice and facilitate a session. So And then last, one thing that I'm learning from Andy Ross, who works with Carl Lehman, I talked with Andy about these sessions, and because he's looking to do a facilitator practice group up on the north side, so we just shared ideas. And he said, I like to start the debrief with a time of quiet where everyone can take a minute to check in with the Lord. And just ask the Lord if there's anything particular he wants to highlight. And then I think it would be cool to do that occasionally throughout the debrief. So I'll try to weave that in to the debrief session today. We'll see how that goes. So, yeah, I think that's everything. Wai-Chen, anything else I'm missing, or any questions or comments from you guys? All right. Well, if you want them, you don't have to use them, but for some people it's helpful. I did sort of a general list of questions that may come up during the debrief. So if you want this as you watch the session, feel free to just glance at it or make notes on it or set it aside, whatever's helpful for you. Well then, I think our next step is to invite who would like to receive and facilitate